Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I welcome Venkat Rao, the Power Platform go-to-market lead at Avanade. Avanade's the sponsor of this week's episode, and Venkat talks to me about the allure of low-code and no-code solutions for large enterprises and the traction that they're getting. Venkat's a big proponent of the Power Platform Center of Excellence Starter Kit, and he explains how companies are taking advantage of it, sometimes at the start of their work with Power Platform, but oftentimes to get a deployment back under control. We also talk about some of the elements of Power Platform and Microsoft Business Applications that Venkat sees as having a big impact moving forward, including mixed reality, RPA, and the work to create true citizen development initiatives. All right. Well, hey Venkat, thanks for joining today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Jason. How are you?
Good. I'm glad to have you on here. This is a great chance to maybe follow up on some of the writing that you were doing for us on MS Dynamics World, for our audience, a great 5-part series. And I thought that would be a great basis for this conversation because, you pay attention to Microsoft and their business application space. Power Platform is just at front and center all the time if it's not talking about one of the specific Dynamics 365 apps. And there's just, I sense a lot of activity with customers paying attention, companies like Avanade and you and your team doing a lot of work there. So I think great chance to catch up. The series was really like looking at the first article or two. It started with really an introduction and how to get started, how to start using some of the tools of the Power Platform. We can maybe start, I think, by even letting you kind of give maybe a bit of a rundown on how you explain what the Power Platform is to organizations, to teams that aren't yet familiar with it, and maybe who are trying to make sense of whether they should even be working with it today.
Yeah, and that's an interesting question, Jason. And, it comes up all the time, right? Because there are lots of customers, and I would say not just customers, even like some of the sellers that we work with in the field, they are also interested in that messaging. What I would say is, without going into too much details, because it's Power Platform, there's just so much to share, right? And there's just so much going on in this world. But what I would say is, generally speaking, when we look at software development, we are traditionally we've always looked at automation, right? Where we are looking at certain processes perhaps that are manual, and then the general trend is that, okay, we have a manual process, we will automate it, right? And that's what the traditional software development has mostly focused on. But with Power Platform, we are taking things a little further, and we are bringing in the experience that our end users they have been craving for such a long time, right? Because it's not just about automation. It's not just about us saying, hey, you had a manual process and it's automated now. Because even though it's automated, it may still not make sense to them. It may still not, conform to the way they function, right? So that's where Power Platform comes in. And it really caters to the experience that they need. And what I mean by experience is, there are certain abilities that the customers are asking for. For example, if I am doing something and I need help, where do I go? How do I find answers to questions? And that's where, and just to give you a simple example, an inbuilt bot can help with certain self-service abilities. So as an end user, I feel more empowered and I feel more confident in my own tasks. So I don't need to go to someone else and find answers to my questions. I can just ask it right there and then. That in itself is an experience. If you look at something like a dashboard, for example, we look at dashboards as this way of looking at information. But then if there's something that we see that's not right, we are required to take action. Now, again, sticking to the traditional way of doing things, dashboards, reports, they are meant to provide information, but not necessarily allow us to take action. But what Power Platform does is, and I'm going to go into a little bit of Power Platform speak here. So in a Power BI dashboard, we can have an embedded Canvas app, let's say, that allows us to take action right from there. So coming back to my point of providing that experience, right? So where we are not just automating, but we are really enabling our customers, our business users, our end users to feel a lot more confident and comfortable in how they operate. So this is where Power Platform really shines. And the fact that we can build solutions in very quick and cost cost-effective manners, I feel like that's the icing on the cake.
One of the things I wondered about in getting ready to talk to you today was just this idea of low code, no code as a bit of an industry segment, or within the IT field, I guess you would say at this point. There's startups that offer it. There's everyone from sort of startups and venture funded firms up to Microsoft who have solutions in this space. And do you get the sense that companies are sort of evaluating between the different possible platforms or tools that they could be adopting to do this kind of work?
Yes. And in fact, we see that a lot. There are some companies who have perhaps already chosen Power Platform as their, platform of choice, or they are leaning more towards it. But in several other cases, we do see customers, they tell us that, right? So they're looking at Mendix, they're looking at OutSystems, and now there are just like so many platforms out there in this low code, no code world. So it's always interesting to see what they're looking for and what they're looking at, and it's on us to really like educate them on how a Power Platform especially helps with their specific needs, right? And we know that the other platforms out there are very versatile. They're very they can do a lot other things as well. But Power Platform is just so vast, and the fact that it just works so naturally in this whole like Microsoft ecosystem, and not just Microsoft ecosystem, like anything that's out there, you can make it work with practically everything. And that's where I think it really shines. And we know about the whole the fact of it has 400 connectors and you can create custom connectors. Seeing all of that actually in action, it's really, really satisfying, not just for us, but even for the customers. They are absolutely wowed by the abilities. And I think what they end up understanding is that even though there are all these other platforms and they have low code, no code abilities, but when they see Power Platform interact with their, like Azure resources or with Dynamics 365 F&O or Salesforce in a very easy manner, and you are able to do things that you were not able to do, say, like 5 years ago, right? That's when the my mind is blown aspect happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine that people would look at some of these capabilities and think, how would I achieve this otherwise? I would have had to have taken my developer resources and assigned them to build this, and then they couldn't have gone off and done some other thing where we really do need professional development.
One thing I would add is the fact that especially like very large enterprises, they have so many like complex requirements, and that's one thing I would want to bring up in this conversation right here for everyone who's listening. Especially if you're in a very large enterprise, you know that you have some very, very complex requirements. So as you are evaluating platforms out there, look at those capabilities. Look at how, do you have the ability to create custom connectors? Do you have the ability to create, like, does your new system create APIs so that the information can be consumed by other systems, etc.? And what's the limit? What kind of limitations your systems have? Because, when you start evaluating platforms, there's always that sense of, okay, so, when you start looking at these products, that the things that you read, basically, they make it sound like, yes, everything is possible, but then you have to like start looking at the fine print and whatnot. You have to really look into the documentation and understand that, okay, so there are certain limitations, right? There are certain restrictions, etc. Or if I do what I want to do with this other product, there are costs associated. So whoever is evaluating these products, I would say, do your due diligence. There's a little more effort involved in understanding these platforms out there. But just know that as you go deeper and deeper, the pros and cons will get more clearer. And I mean, I'm a Power Platform person, so I may sound biased, but Power Platform is a lot more transparent, and there are lots and lots of abilities that you get that the other platforms do not have.
Yeah, and maybe we could talk a little bit about maybe the evolution of your professional focus, because as I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the past, you did a lot with Dynamics CRM in past times, right? How did that evolve?
So, and that's a great question. I feel like everyone should understand this evolution because, a lot of what you see with Power Platform, and especially like Power Apps, and if you've heard about like a CDS or Common Data Service, which now has a new name. So like a lot of that has come from this product called Dynamics 365 or Dynamics CRM, right? So that product in itself is absolutely amazing, right? And again, I come from that background, so I may sound a little biased, but the fact that there's this product that lets you do sales and customer service and marketing and so many other things within the realm of its own, like the product scope, it's really really fascinating. Now, what used to happen though, so I'm if I go back in time and say 5, 6, 7 years ago, because we were mostly embedded in the Dynamics world, there were so many instances where our customers would ask us and say, hey, like, can we do this and can we do that? And if Dynamics could do it, we would say yes. And if Dynamics couldn't do it, we would say no, sorry, it's not possible. But the way this product has evolved, so now, of course, there's Power Apps, right, with the whole like CDS database or Dataverse, as now it's called. But then the abilities of bringing in more power through like Power Automate, which is about like back-end automation, or Power Virtual Agent for self-service bot abilities, Power BI for like insights and whatnot. So the amalgamation of all these four together bring in such amazing power that we barely say no anymore to any question. So if a customer says, hey, is this possible? The first answer always is yes, it's definitely possible. Of course, I'm simplifying this. I'm generalizing this to some extent, but the possibilities are very many compared to Dynamics. And where I'm going with this is, so speaking of evolution, right? So again, going back in time, there were so many instances where like a Dynamics implementation would, I hate to use this word, but it would fail because the customers had certain expectations that wouldn't necessarily be, addressed by the Dynamics product. And this is where I'll bring in the experience aspect again, because the customers had expectations around a certain experience. And the Dynamics product, again, even though it was awesome, it had its own limitations. Now, through the evolution of the product and through the introduction of Power Apps and Power Automate, etc., and this like amalgamated offering of Power Platform, we have started addressing those pain points that were left behind by Dynamics. We have started plugging in holes that are left by Dynamics, right? So this is where, again, from an evolution standpoint, it's really fascinating to see how, like, way back we used to say, oh, sorry, no, it's not possible, or sorry, we couldn't deliver what you were expecting. That is being taken care of now. I don't know if that makes sense, Jason.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And certainly from my perspective, sort of seeing the products change, evolve, and now you have these dedicated dynamic sales and service and marketing apps and others. And then you have this platform that sort of has the same heritage, but has really been broken out. It really is kind of an amazing transformation, because I think from what I can tell, it really kind of embodies what people like you, and I think a lot of the technologists from that previous era kind of envisioned for the platform when terms like XRM were being used, and when a lot of these solutions were being built right off of Dynamics as opposed to the platform.
And Jason, speaking of XRM, right? So again, I think we are living that XRM world right now, but without having to pay for the Dynamics license, if that makes sense. Because like
Sure.
A decade ago, there was this concept of XRM where, oh, of course you can build anything in the CRM product, but by the way, you will have to pay the cost will be the same as a CRM, right? But now we have this new concept where, yes, build anything you want, but also you will be paying substantially less. You don't have to buy the Dynamics product. If what you need is not CRM-esque, go ahead and buy the Power Apps license and build some very sophisticated solutions in that platform.
Yeah, and one of the things you, going back to some of the writing you did, was you touch on a few of the, I think, largely industry-specific solutions that you have built with different clients to sort of meet various needs. And some of them go really large scale or broad, especially, so maybe not a single application or single process being used with huge numbers of users, but a huge number of apps, thousands of apps in one case, up to 10,000, I think you mentioned, or sorry, 10,000 like custom processes, tens of thousands of users across those. I don't know, can you talk a little more about what, maybe any examples of where you've seen some of this scale come in, where it really is dedicated to building as Power Apps as opposed to some of the pre-built applications?
Yep. So, and speaking of like very large number of apps, oh man. So, yes. So there are customers who have thousands of apps. And we work with customers who've had, like, believe it or not, 80,000 apps, 90,000 apps, 160,000 like Power Automate flows and things like that. So and we are talking about like very massive companies here, right? So they are extremely large enterprises, and they have people around the world building one thing or another. So looking at those kinds of numbers is very like fascinating, and also it's like, whoa, that's a lot of development. And this one company that we've been working with, so when they came to us, they looked at their current landscape, and they hadn't necessarily brought Power Apps into their enterprise as a tool. It was something that their end users, they just like organically learned about it from blogs and whatnot, and they just went in there, and they were like, oh wow, we have access to this thing called Power Apps and Power Automate, let's see what happens. And 4 years and 5,000 apps and 10,000 flows later, you have this wildfire, right? So and that's what's so interesting is when companies come to us in that phase, they tell us, they say, look, we know you can help us build solutions, but that's not our focus right now. Help us control this wildfire. Building apps is secondary, so, and then that's when we start talking about like governance and things like that. But what's really interesting, and the good news here is that many companies, many like extremely large companies out there are appreciating Power Platform, and they're embracing it. And like, we work together and we find out together that there are certain limitations and there are certain surprises here and there, but we all work together, and we work very closely with Microsoft also, and we just make things happen. And before you know it, there is this like amazing solution, and then everyone is just amazed. And Jason, I don't know if I'm answering your question. I feel like I went on a tangent here.
No, that's okay. As a follow-up, I am curious, when you talk about things growing like wildfire or sort of really taking off inside of an organization, have you seen that where, maybe at first there wasn't a lot of governance and all of a sudden thousands of things are springing up, and then it's up to maybe you working with the corporate IT team or some central group to try to rein it back in? Does that happen?
That happens all the time. And again, it's so interesting because, and the culprit here, if I may, is, the free flavor of Power Apps that you get with Office 365, right? So because it's already available, and by default, I believe it's just like turned on. So if you are an Office 365 user, you have access to Power Apps. At least that's how it was, like, I don't know, 1.5 to 3 years ago, and people just start building things. So within like 6 to 8 to 12 months, they have these like literally thousands of apps and flows, and customers come to us in that stage. I mean, they do come to us at the beginning of their journey also, but it's not unusual for someone to come to us in the middle of this, dare I say it, mess, and they come to us and ask for our help, and making sure that, hey, let's clean up this mess first. And I say mess because what our customers see is, even though there are thousands of apps in their like environments, probably 80% of those are junk. Right. And by junk, I mean that people went in there, they experimented, they explored, and then they left whatever they were building, walked away, and never came back. Right. So you will see all these like stale solutions from 6 months ago, 18 months ago. They're just sitting there, and no one is using them. So definitely we should do something about it, right? So those are the kinds of conversations we have, where let's do some level of cleanup first, and then make sure that we have a little bit of structure in place, right? Because you don't want, Power Platform is a way for people to get creative. And it really is an art too, right? Because you can do so many things with it. And in order to make that happen, you need to have the ability to get creative, which means that it won't be fair if like central IT says, we're going to lock everything down. You will have very restricted access. Now go build things, right? So I think that's a little unfair. So in order to make sure that doesn't happen, what we do is we work with customers and we make sure that we have the right guardrails in place, right? So there are ways to monitor and govern what's being built and how they're being built, etc., so that you're not limiting people's creative abilities, but at the same time making sure that everything stays within the enterprise, the right standards and abilities are being brought in, and everything is secure.
Well, that gets into, I guess, the idea of building out a center of excellence. Microsoft has a starter kit for that, which I think you've also touched on in one of your articles. What are your views on its usefulness? Who should be working with it?
It's amazing. First of all, so it is so helpful, especially for companies, who are looking at. I mean, it applies to everyone, but especially for those who know that, oh, there's a lot of stuff in our environment. We need to understand what it is, right? So again, we work with customers who they have a certain vision in their mind and they're willing to invest their time and effort in it. But then first, they need help understanding what does our current landscape look like. So in those regards, the COE Star Kit is amazing because it's a one-stop shop for just understanding everything that's going on in your tenant. So your environments, your apps, your flows, who's building it, etc., etc. So from that perspective, it's extremely cool and extremely amazing and very, very helpful because we work with some very large companies, and what that means is that they have, like I said, very large number of apps and flows, which means it's a massive amount of data for the COE starter kit, right? So we've seen some surprises where, for example, a company that has, say, 95,000 licensed users, the data that's generated for that COE starter kit is just like ginormous, right? And in those instances, the COE starter kit, it may have some, it may not behave the way it's supposed to behave, and there are some surprises, and that's how we uncover like the limitations of the COE Star Kit, right? So, but again, the good news is that we work with Microsoft very closely, and we are helping Microsoft address those kinds of limitations and roadblocks and whatnot. And just to give you another example, because it's all so much data being generated, and because there are all these like API calls being made, there are certain restrictions, there are certain like API limitations that CDS has, right? So we see those kinds of things in action in the context of COE Starter Kit, right? Where we are trying to get all this information, and then, oops, you hit your API limitation. Try again in 11 seconds, or try again in 2 minutes, because of all these restrictions that are in place. So it's very interesting to like solve those kinds of problems. And I think these are the things that you don't necessarily learn about from blogs and webinars and whatnot. But we are on the ground. We are working with customers directly. We are experiencing this, and we are helping products like COE Starter Kit to become much, much better by understanding the limitations like this, and working with Microsoft in making that package even better.
And is it something you can build upon? Is that what you end up doing with it with clients? Do they have needs that you then, I don't know, is it building extra reports and those kinds of things to augment?
Yes, and that's a great question. Glad you brought that up, Jason. So there are certain, and again, COE Starter Kit, as it stands out of the box, it's really, really amazing. But then, once our customers start using it, they realize that, oh, I wish it had this, I wish it had that. And that's where like we end up building more things, right? Where, to give you some simple examples, one common request that we get is, can we see app usage? Like how successful is an app? What screens are being used, for example, in an app? So that kind of like telemetry information, right? So that is not built into the COE Star Kit, but we end up extending the kit by building those kinds of functions, right? So creating another report where you are showing app usage and app insights, etc. Another thing that comes up is, okay, so because in larger enterprises, there's this like cost center aspect where, okay, so if you're from a certain department or a certain team, your department has to pay for your app or your license and things like that, right? So they want visibility into, okay, what cost centers are involved, who is paying for these licenses, who is paying for these apps, etc. So you build in those kinds of abilities as well. into the COE Star Kit. So again, coming back to that point of how useful is a COE Star Kit, it's very useful, but then, there almost always there's a need to extend it by adding more reporting and, just making it even more useful for the customer.
That's interesting to hear. I'd read what Microsoft has put out about it, and I've seen some of the chart it provides in the admin center, in the Power Platform admin center, is just kind of the context for using all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was interested to know because I hadn't actually heard many sort of firsthand accounts of its usefulness, but that's great to hear. Shifting gears a little bit, so one of the other things I did want to ask about, because you mentioned it in one of the pieces, was I think it was a Power Apps solution that also worked hand in hand with HoloLens 2. Do you remember that example? And maybe, or can you talk about how they do work well together?
Yeah, I can give you a general idea of what that is all about. So one thing I would say is whenever we talk about HoloLens, we're talking about customers who are perhaps a little like forward thinking, right? Because they're willing to invest in a certain technology that's not necessarily mainstream yet, right? And all you see out there are like all these demo videos, which are amazing, but then you never really hear about, okay, where is this being used, right? There's not a lot of like success stories out there where you understand that, okay, I see this is where it's being used and this is where it makes sense, etc. So that is something, it's unique to Avanade in that we do have customers who buy HoloLens and who are willing to invest in it because they see a lot of potential in it. So some of the examples where we have worked with HoloLens is, so there's that whole concept of like, oh man, what is it called? I'm blanking out on the name. So the Dynamics.
Like remote assist or guides or something.
Right. So yeah. So guides and remote assist, right? So those are fairly common. But then there's also that angle of, okay, so there's remote assist through HoloLens, but also I am performing some updates in my Power App, right? So and these are instances where you may not necessarily have access to a phone, for example, or you don't want to use another device because you're already like wearing a HoloLens. You're doing some remote assist work, or you're looking at a guide. And then that's where like the HoloLens aspect really shines, where like, I'm just doing my thing and I need to update something. I don't necessarily need to pull out a device, open Power Apps. I can just invoke it in my HoloLens like window and I can make my updates.
You can even like see like Power Apps controls or Power Apps interfaces within the mixed reality view.
Yes. And in fact, so there was this other energy company that we were talking to where, they have all these like nuclear reactors, right? Where there are, within those nuclear reactors, there are areas where you are not supposed to go or you are not supposed to like enter, etc. But then using HoloLens, you can monitor them from a distance, through like cameras and whatnot. And then at the same time, make updates in your Power Apps, right? So these are some of the creative ways you can use HoloLens. I would just reiterate, typically these companies are extremely forward thinking. They are willing to experiment. They are willing to kind of invest in the new age thing, so, and they're willing to fail as well. So it's not that everyone out there is wanting this, obviously, because we never hear about these stories, but there are a select few who are willing to like just see what this is all about.
My 2 cents on HoloLens is that there is a really serious opportunity there. I mean, and that it will really pick up momentum over time. I don't know the exact speed, but I mean, between, like you said, even more, I think it probably starts with more of the mundane cases, use cases that like just very straightforward use of some of the, remote assist and guides and layouts, those pre-built apps, and just seeing those go into use. But I've even heard, that there's opportunities at sort of a micro level with organizations that maybe only need a few, but they can still get some pretty interesting benefits out of using them and putting interfaces into that mixed reality environment. I think it's just, it's a question of how quickly it evolves, how quickly it gets traction and gets believers, I suppose.
And Jason, you brought up an interesting point around like mundane use cases. And I feel like it applies to Power Platform in general as well, where, a lot of these companies, I mean, there are a select few where they say, okay, all right, we're going to buy 100,000 licenses for every employee in our company. But for the most part, these conversations start very small, right? Because these companies are also wanting to evaluate the platform. And typically it starts with something mundane, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
it's mundane, it's painful, and they come to us and they say, can you show us how Power Platform can make this more exciting and make this more like automated, say, you know? And that's when we come in and we show them the abilities of the platform for their mundane use case. That's when, again, all bulbs go off. There's a lot of excitement. And Jason, what also happens is when we do these kinds of engagements, say we build one solution, for this like company, that solution becomes such a huge hit that the stakeholders within that company, or like whoever is involved from a product perspective, they go around demoing that solution to other stakeholders, to other teams. So this whole platform excites them so much that they want others to know about this as well. So like I said, it starts very small, but then the excitement that it generates, it exponentially just reaches out to a much wider audience very, very quickly within a company.
All right, so I'm going to give you another just unsolicited opinion here. When you
Sure.
talk about mundane, to me, one of the things that I think Microsoft is most excited about, you can tell me what you think of this too, but that Microsoft has been most sort of vocal about and enthusiastic about in the Power Platform, but to me is, it's fine, it's good, and I think it's important, but it's also to me, very mundane, is some of the advances with RPA-based capabilities in the Power Platform. And I say mundane because it's oftentimes, it's dealing with legacy solutions.
Mhm.
It's doing things that are very boring, mundane activities in many cases, with a benefit, of course, as an outcome. But I don't know. It seems like when I think about what's a big deal coming down the road in Power Platform, RPA things with like the new Power Automate desktop, and some of those advances are maybe here already. Certainly, I guess there's more probably to that, and there's probably more in other areas. Are there? I don't know, what's your view on the RPA side, and then are there other sort of things that you're eagerly awaiting next from Microsoft in terms of the platform itself?
So RPA is, again, it's very interesting. I'm not necessarily an RPA expert, but one thing I can tell you is we have customers who are excited for it. So like we talk to a lot of banks, and banks still use a lot of these like antiquated, very old, like written in the 80s and 90s kind of solutions. For them, RPA is very exciting. So what they're seeing is we have all these solutions. We will probably not get rid of it anytime soon because of like company protocols and policies, and perhaps it's like the backbone of the company. But then how do we automate things around that like antiquated piece of software, right? So that's where they see a lot of potential. And I agree with you. So it's there's a lot of like mundane conversations that happen around RPA as well. But I feel like if you need to talk to the right people. So there are subsets of people within a company for whom RPA is like, it's just amazing. So they're
Right.
dying to get it, and they understand what it can do for them. So in certain cases, RPA may not necessarily be something that's deployed like enterprise wide. And again, I may be wrong, but I'm just, this is just a thought. This is just a naive thought that I have. But certainly there are teams and units within a company where it will absolutely like shine.
Yeah, I believe that. And I don't know. I mean, I wonder if it's something that will 10 years from now be less important, and maybe the more true sort of new app development will be more relevant at that point. And maybe it's sort of an interim step in getting away from, like you said, some of those applications that have some life left in them, but not endless.
And
Sort of
Jason, you
evergreen.
said 10 years, and it made me shiver a little bit because I don't know what's going to happen in the next 6 months, right?
Right.
Like, it's just, I cannot even fathom like imagining what things will be like 10 years down the line.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, and that leads me back to that other point. I mean, what are you looking forward to get your own hands on, to maybe introduce to customers 6 months or a year down the road? Do you have anything in mind?
So, based on our conversation so far with our customers and prospects, I know that there is a lot of potential in Power Platform. So because of the kind of things customers ask, and the kind of excitement they show when we deliver what they're asking for, and the fact that, and we have done so many like transformational, work for a lot of these companies. Like, we talked about COE. The COE in itself, I feel like a lot of the general sense out there is that a COE means it's a COE's target, but it's just so much more than that, right? And we have done that kind of work where we really help the customers understand what goes into this platform, in terms of technical abilities, in terms of your efforts, your commitment, and design standards, etc. And seeing all of that become successful is very like pleasing, and I'm excited for that, right? Because I know that we have transformed so many companies out there, and we are helping them. I'm ready to talk to these other folks standing in line who have the same expectations, who have the same desires, but they don't know how to do it. And in fact, if I may digress a bit, there are companies who come to us and they say, look, we have decided to embrace citizen development. We are ready to take it on. We don't know how to do it. And that's where we need your help, right? So again, just showing them what citizen development is. Because again, citizen development is not just about business users building apps. It's about building solutions that provide the experience that you need. They make you self-sufficient. And at the same time, they are also like helping you with your numbers, whether you're looking at profitability, whether you're looking at like improvements. So there are lots of ways to quantify many, many things, so, and that's where if citizen development is done the right way, it can really help you in the long run. So, and then that's where like we come in and we really help customers understand that. And so I'm excited for that, whether it's citizen development through Power Platform, the capabilities of the platform, what's in store in the future, just enabling the customers to make the right decisions and be self-sufficient. I think that's what really excites me.
Well, I'll be watching carefully. I'm sure you will too. I mean, there's announcements coming out constantly. It seems like some of them sort of fine-grained, and some of them big, important sort of changes to roadmap and product updates. So I think all of those things are going to just continue kind of seemingly without end here. So I'll definitely have to catch up with you again in the future on this. Thanks again for the article series as well. We'll obviously link to it in the description of the episode here. Yeah, thanks for being with me.
Thank you for having me, Jason.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks once again to Venkat for joining me today. If you want to learn more about Venkat's views on Power Platform, I'm going to put a link to a 5-part article series that Venkat recently wrote in the description. You can check that out, and also check out more information on Avanade's Power Platform offerings. To get in touch with me, you can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.